What struck me this morning is the topic was to talk about evil, but we really talked about two different things. One is evil and one was suffering. And obviously we don't like, most of us don't like suffering, so we tend to label it evil or bad. But for me, they're two different things. Suffering, and we all suffer terribly, and we brought in the suffering of the others, is somehow necessary for evolution. Probably when the one divides into two, once you've got two, you've got friction, and they rub against each other and clash back and forth, and of course when you create millions and billions of little bits, you got suffering and you got paradox, and you've got a lot of hurt and a lot of pain. I don't know, though, that it helps to call things evil. I read Genesis kind of like a fundamentalist, in a sense, because it says God created night and day and called it good, and God created the fish and the fowl and called it good. God created male and female and called it good. All of these things are polarities. They're natural polarities, and God calls every single one of them good. And then he says, but don't eat of the fruit of the tree of good and evil. And what's the difference? It just seems to me that the tree of good and evil is an unnatural polarity that doesn't exist except in our heads. We're the ones that label things good and evil. It doesn't exist in the real world. The real world has a lot of suffering and a lot of horrible things happen, at least things that we label horrible, but I don't think it helps too much to talk about evil, because then you're getting into blame and you're getting into guilt and you're getting into all kind of things that are kind of unpleasant.
So thank you, Jim. Just to kind of, as we kind of had this dialogue, here's where kind of, if forgive me for doing it, but I'm going to do a Ken move here. That is to say, you need here levels of consciousness. Here kind of levels and map is really, really important. That is to say, the way my reading of Meister Eckhart anyways, or the Kabbalists would say it would be, that there are different levels. So for example, in Ecclesiastes we would say, greater is the, right, Ma'itron ha'or me'achoshech. Greater is the light than the darkness, binary, good, evil. That'd be one read. That's a legitimate read at a certain level of consciousness, which is important. And then, right, the Kabbalist reads that same text and he says, greater is the good that comes from the darkness. Right? So the first level is, greater is the good than the darkness. The second level is, greater is the good that comes from the darkness. And I think that's the paradox that Fred was kind of pointing to. But when we hold paradox, right, and here's in the paradox is, I do need to be able to name things evil, or I can't fight Nazism. Right? That is to say, if I can't basically say, right, that's evil. Actually, Pol Pot, that's actually evil. Right? Actually, when I turned on, right, I mean, I don't know if anyone saw it on Ted Koppel like a week ago, this just horrible, horrible thing about child slavery in the world today. And then they had a thing, right, on the same night, which was unbelievable, in South Africa today, right, about people who are 18-month-old babies in the hospital who are being raped. That's evil. That's actually evil. And I want to call it evil, right? And I don't want to call it anything else. Right? So in my paradox, I need to call that evil, and I need to hold the paradox. So I think that's exactly what Fred brought us to in this kind of paradox. And you kind of expressed that paradox on both sides. Thank you.
I've really appreciated this conversation, and I think we've been very thorough with the view we've taken. There are other conversations about evil that throw a different definition out. And the place I encountered it most forcefully was in the book that Sally mentioned, People of the Lie by Scott Peck. Because it was a focus on the inner turn and the choices, those crossroads where we make a choice that's really negative, and how that can get bent and powerful to where we are consumed by qualities and energies that have their own slippery slope of momentum, wherein we can be carried into enacting evil. And what is the inner experience of going down those pathways? Right. We haven't really talked about that in depth, but it's a very interesting dynamic. And one of the forces that is alive in that conversation is a conversation about power. And how, as we grow spiritually, we inherit a very profound power, but it's a very yin power. It's a power at the level of being. And the power that we can get sometimes by breaking convention, the kind of thing Aleister Crowley was interested in, the kind of magic that is potential in breaking out of certain levels of awareness. Some of this becomes activated in genuine spiritual growth, and some of this conversation, the higher levels of the conversation about crazy wisdom, can get into that. There is ways that we inherit power and siddhi, and it's very alive and beautiful and not negative. But there are also other magics and yogas and dynamics in which we can be seized by the potential to be powerful here, for this centricity, to act upon the whole as if it were center, it were manifesting source. It could have it be. And the kind of thing that consumes someone who stands in the place of a Stalin or a Hitler is psychologically profoundly interesting, dark, and revealing. There are lessons in that. And for me, that brings me back really to one of the key things that enlivens me in any conversation about ethics, which is the moment before that ethical lapse. The moment before, when the force of my being rushed toward an expression of anger or an exertion of my power, as if I had no other choice. Somehow there was another choice. There was a moment when I could have glimpsed it, and I didn't. What inside me acted in that way? What is that about? And there's something in the alchemy of the heart that is an interesting conversation. I just want to call into the space, not necessarily to ask for the whole thing, but it's a different piece.
You are listening to www.integralnaked.org.